Copy abilities, Kirby's biggest hook. Ain't nothing like going through a game and messing around with whatever new ability Kirby has. I personally am a bomb fan, but it did get me thinking, what were the best of the best in a lore standpoint? How strong is each Kirby copy ability actually? That's mostly what today's video is going to be about, figuring out just how genuinely strong each of the Kirby copy abilities are and put them in some sort of tier list, going from F tier to S tier. For a good description of each tier, F tier goes to any copy abilities that just doesn't have any sort of combat use whatsoever, even remotely. These copy abilities are so weak in fighting that it's almost comical. E tiers are basically F tier copy abilities, but they have a small asterisk to them, basically a possible extra ability or gimmick that gives them something of a better place in the tier list, compared to other copy abilities. D tier are copy abilities that do have combat ability, but are very limited. Not a preferable choice to fight with due to how weird its cases can be. C tiers are completely average copy abilities combat wise. Nothing great, nothing bad. They're balanced, and they give a decent amount of utility to the character. B tier are heavy hitters. These go to copy abilities that essentially are purely meant for combat, so they are pretty potent and strong, but often still limited. Basically think D tier, but the combat abilities are meant to be for fighting. A tier copy abilities that are either B tier copy abilities but have this one extra feature that can push them to S tier, or are blatantly stronger than B tier, just not capable of S tier. And S tier is the best of the best, absolutely uncontested and 100% the best in the franchise given, without any questions. Each copy ability will only really be judged by two criteria, coverage and X factor. Coverage is essentially how much variety and ground that it's able to account for, and X factor is that certain unique index to the copy ability that'll push it further. Think Haxes. No stat coverage. Most copy abilities have identical stats since it's an identical Kirby, but if a stat change is significant, I'll bring it up. Some rule sets for this tier list too. 1. Endgame copy abilities are not allowed, so the Star Rod, Rainbow Sword, and the like are not gonna appear. All things considered, they would all be S rank anyway. They would require their own separate tier list. Single-use copy abilities are also not allowed. They have no use outside of their one time, and once that's dealt with, you're just left with base Kirby. There is an exception for copy abilities with full movesets but have a single-use attack. So just because Artist, Magic, and Hammer have single-use attacks that makes them lose their copy ability doesn't mean that they are affected by the rules. Game mechanics will not be considered for power, but will be considered for skill. So to better explain this, just because someone like Throw can absolutely shred against bosses because it's invincible throw animation, I'm not going to consider that a standpoint of his power, nor his own invincibility a feat, as they are both mechanics. But the fact that Throw Kirby can grapple damn near anything will be considered as a feat, as that can be seen as a standpoint of skill. Essentially, I'll look more towards what the move implies rather than what the move is. I'll also not be considering copy abilities from Smash Bros. I feel like that went without saying, but I want to make it clear. And no evolved copy abilities either. That's an unfair advantage, and also no combined copy abilities from Crystal Shard, Star Allies, or Squeak Squad. It makes this easier for me. Alright, that should cover all my bases. So now that we have everything in place, let's start at the lowest tier of abilities, F tier. I think this goes without saying. Like genuinely, Kirby has a copy ability that turns him into a balloon. I genuinely don't see a good use case for this stuff. The ability doesn't just have zero coverage, it has negative coverage. It's vulnerable to literally everything, and what could have been a very novel copy ability concept where Kirby just has a balloon he can use to fight with, could use a lot of reference points for that copy ability too. I hope they come back to this one day actually. This is a copy ability concept waiting to happen. I don't think that copy ability idea would be anything above D tier, but it's kind of crazy that this copy ability is probably the major reason why this tier list needed an F tier to begin with. I mean, there is one more technique, but it's not nearly as defenseless. Cupid. This is a copy ability? Yep, Cupid or Angel Kirby, and it does nothing you think a Cupid Kirby could do. The only tricks of the trait that it has is flying and shooting arrows, 3 at a time. Unfortunately, this is pretty bad. Now of course, being able to fly is pretty neat, but Kirby can already fly, and they also have the Warp Star for easy compensation. Unless Cupid has speed equivalent to a Warp Star, which it most certainly does not, it doesn't have any real advantages. Most Kirbys can just avoid the arrows and smack the out of it. Its only coverage is range, and it doesn't do it well. And that's it for F tier, just these two copy abilities. As mentioned, E tiers are essentially F tiers, but they have that certain gimmick to it that pushes them up. Yes, Mini is an E tier instead of F tier. I need you to entertain a possibility. If Mini, at all, keeps the strength that regular Kirby has, like an Ant-Man type situation, that would honestly really help Mini out in a combat scenario, because you have this little dude, it's very hard to hit for some reason, and for some other reason, hits like a truck. This is only a mere possibility, so Mini stays this low. But if it was an actual mechanic of the move, this ability could be so annoying to face against. Not really carried by coverage, but its hacks definitely pushes it higher. It's definitely beating this copy ability if that's the case though. Laser being this low might be a slight surprise. All wall bouncing mechanic might be pretty helpful. But unfortunately, as much as this helps his range, is all he has. He doesn't have any close quarters capacity, and even in the range department, he only has this one move. There's not much utility to be had in a combat situation. One can only use a move so many times before it starts getting predictable as heck. And imagine this guy trying to hit a guy like Mini, a squirmy little guy just avoiding all these guys' shots. Laser Falter is pretty harsh, especially against the higher copy abilities in this tier list. It's gonna be one of 3 techniques in this tier actually, with Bubble Kirby being in the same tier. I think it goes without explaining why Bubble is in this tier. Not only is it considered a rather weak copy ability damage wise, which doesn't really matter for the sake of this video, but its range is weak and its copy ability essence gimmick is pretty wasted in most combat situations anyway. We are talking about Bubble's skill level after all, not the copy abilities it can store up. This character might even lose to Cupid if it wasn't for the fact that it actually has decent mid-range and close range for the single move it also has. Its gimmick helps it out in one way though. Being able to create small star spits for it to shoot out does have an extra range option many of the copy abilities just wouldn't have. It has those merits to stand on, and if it could bubble projectiles, all the better, which takes us to D tier already. If you remember, D tier copy abilities do have combat prowess, just very limited combat prowess. Bomb hence makes this list as our lowest D tier. I love this copy ability. It's my favorite copy ability out of the whole list, but I would be lying if I said this was a powerful technique. There's a reason this one isn't much of a fan favorite, because aside from throwing bombs and placing them on opponents' heads, bomb's only coverage is range, and while it is really good range, because it's a bomb, and he can even double its size. So it does its one coverage really well, but it's one of the few copy abilities with a negative X factor. That being, the bomb can damage Kirby, which is a pretty substantial weakness. It makes bomb amongst the lower tiers, and while I mega dig this copy ability, it's definitely way more limited than it can handle.
Missiles, please! Here it comes! Missiles!
Missile is also low on this list, due to having only one coverage, and that's to run into people. It's definitely better than the potential of Mini and Bubble, and the biggest reason it trumps Laser in spite of them only having one single move is cause Missile actually has an X factor, making him an exception to the rule. Any and all impact Kirby makes does not damage him. This makes it a relatively safe copy ability to use. It's just that safety is technically all this copy ability has. His damage is nothing to write home about either. You know whose damage is? It's not even that strong. Needle is here too, only has 3 moves. I can't really say much else for it. High jump. It's high jump. Biggest reason this copy ability is in here is that it has combat utility, and that's kinda it. It's probably the most undervalued copy ability with combat utility. It has moves for sure, and its movement can be a pretty solid coverage option. It's actually pretty rare for copy abilities to cover movement, but it's not movement that would be tricky for any copy ability to handle against. The Warp Star is very easily able to make movement coverages a non-issue. The copy ability needs to have really substantial movement for it to matter, so high jump loses a lot of its only coverage. What y'all think of this tier list so far? It's been a bit sensible, yeah? It's not like I'm gonna put a hot take in the middle of nowhere, like that'd be crazy. You've seen my videos, I'm a sound, analytical, factual. Look, I know putting Spear here sounds crazy. There's a lot of weapon-based copy abilities, and Spear is definitely always in the conversation of favorite and strong ones. It's kinda in the same situation as High Jump Kirby. It has combat ability, and damn, I'd say it has great close quarters, but that's all it has. Its movement options get overshadowed by the Warp Star, and its range option is throwing a spear, which isn't that good compared to something like Bomb's multiple different range attacks or even Laser's singular range attack. Spear weirdly falls pretty short, lacking in the area stated, and it's one of the rare weapon copies that just doesn't have an X factor, which I guess isn't too surprising considering the basis of this copy ability are Waddle Dees, but you know, Drill is here too. I don't think I need to explain why. Digging is all it's got, but it does share its position with Cutter Kirby, having no X factors. It has decent range, but it's very situational, and has decent close quarters, but it's very situational. This is not a combat ready copy ability. It's still alright and you can get some really cool plays off of it, but when you're given range that works when you're not looking at it and only 3 close quarter attacks, it's a little difficult to justify. It has its use cases, but it's pretty weak in those use cases still. Cutter and Spear share much of the same position as a result. C tier is stated to have at least one X factor, and if not that, the moveset at least decently covers 2 combat aspects. We start this tier with Whip, which has dual coverage. Its coverage as a melee tool speaks for itself, but it also has coverage as a grapple tool. Whip is insanely good at grappling. In spite of it being a single move, it's quick, fast, and the best part is that it's a ranged grapple on top of that. Usually when you have a ranged grapple, it's very slow, but Whip doesn't have this flaw, which means it's incredible at both melee and grappling. Magic also falls under this tier. While it's not as good at combat as say Spear and Whip, Magic is the first power-up with a genuine X factor, which gives it a substantial advantage. It's one of the few copy abilities that have a single-use move, and the single-use move basically confirms that this copy ability can do a lot of jank. It's a unique edge over other copy abilities. Magic is also a very unorthodox copy ability. Two of the moves actually give Kirby really good range, and since Magic Kirby is based off magicians in real life, if Kirby can pull off those tricks, Magic ends up settling really well into this tier. His X factor and having good range moves make him a decent solid candidate for this tier. And Magic isn't the only copy ability with one coverage and a decent X factor, as Animal is another such copy ability with coverage and an X factor too. Animal has decent melee, similar to Magic. It's not the best, but still pretty decent, and while his melee is not as good as Spear, Kirby, and Whips, its X factor is where it heavily makes up for it. It's a very simple but very useful X factor. You can dig underground. He's a better drill. This specific ability should not be slept on. Kirby basically gets the ability of a free surprise attack from this move every time, and he also technically gets a get out of jail free card for a lot of moves that might hit a regular opponent. These two factors push Kirby pretty high up, and this kinda gives him a major edge over the lowest tier copy abilities. The rest of the copy abilities in this tier are almost entirely carried by their X factor. They just have that little cheese to them that makes them a little too unnecessarily stronger than the lower tiers. For example, if you're fighting clean Kirby, it's not a 1v1, it's a 3v1. Good luck fighting Kirby while Choo Choo, Pitch, and Nago are also throwing hands at you, and Kirby gets other abilities from these three as well, like a water bucket MLG and flying. Clean doesn't have much combat use. As funny as sweeping the floor can damage someone, that's it. It's just the simple fact that you're getting jumped by 4 people that makes this copy ability get pushed from F tier to C tier. Seriously, the decision to add cameos in this moveset might have actually made it scary to fight against. And there is another character that can technically do the same. Artist is also entirely carried by its X factor. Pretty good close quarters, but the fact that Kirby can essentially paint to life whatever he wants is a pretty strong move. Artist is also one of the few copy abilities that has a single use move too, which implies it's some sort of evolution to paint Kirby. If anything, Kirby is able to technically give you a better jumping than Clean can give, just with weaker allies. I would bring up Still Life and how it gives Artist healing, but if anything, that kind of works against Kirby. It doesn't directly heal him, it just creates food for Kirby to eat from that anyone can take for themselves. It's not the best choice out there, clearly. Then there's Doctor, which has an X factor carry too. It's the simple fact that Kirby gets free, easy heals from this ability. This copy, like Artist and Clean, doesn't have good coverages, but I'll be damned, being able to constantly glug a potion and use that to your advantage while also having a whiteboard as a shield sounds like such an annoying combination. Doctor would suck to fight against, and you know it. And Ranger is here too. Yes, I know, Kirby having a Glock sounds like an S tier character. Problem, Ranger has amazing range and nothing else. It's one of the most strongest range characters, but he just doesn't have anything else to aid him. Also, Copy is in this tier. Not really gonna explain this one. C tier is the most middle tier, which technically means the redundant abilities should be here. I don't even know if it should be in this list. Very technically, this is a single use copy ability. B tier copy abilities either have solid X factors along with good combat prowess, or just really good combat prowess. They very reliably could handle themselves in a fight. Consider them competitively viable. Ice is probably the most intriguing example, as it has really good combat prowess. In fact, a good chunk of Ice's strength is how it has defense and offense built into nearly all of its moves. Its simple ability to freeze objects and turn them into projectiles allows the copy ability to not only gain range abilities, but also counter range moves too, a very rare coverage that copy abilities have. It's also incredibly strong on pure defense too, being one of the few copy abilities that actually gives Kirby a new guard that, as far as I'm aware, removes chip damage from Kirby too, and he even has moves that utilizes this frozen cover as an attack. That combined with the ability to make ice spikes covers body and ice breath, and Kirby actually has solid melee coverage in this form too. Ice Kirby is a very solid B tier, but balance doesn't mean S tier. Nothing about Ice is overpowering. It's simply solid. Same goes for Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo is mainly carried by its amazing melee, insane coverage on every attack. Solid in its offense, and it does it really well. And while Yo-Yo doesn't have long range, it's really solid mid-range, which is also a big rarity amongst copy abilities. Brilliant melee, brilliant mid-range, and a grapple, and he has really good footwork too with Kirby's more breakdance-like combat, which is a solid advantage against other melees. Copy abilities that are combat focused and elemental are gonna be in this tier for much similar reasons. Jet, Circus, and Beam share similar reasons to Yo-Yo. Jet has brilliant movement to the point where I would actually consider it a match against Warp Star, considering its whole shtick is its ability to zip around in flight. It's balanced, brilliant movements, good melee, but lacks range, mid-range, and defense. Circus is incredibly unorthodox, which lends into a very unpredictable style of fighting, which is a unique coverage of skill that it has. This along with being able to make movements that make him intangible, set stuff on fire including himself, and even has range options with bowling pins and balloon animals. So good skill, good range, decent melee. He has a solid foundation too, and Beam speaks for itself, having great range, probably one of the most potent in the series, but still having solid melee in spite of it, even having grapples, which is another rarity, and he shares that with Jet. Bell is also here due to having amazing defensive play and some range. It's very much good at combat, and Shield even counts as a counter if I remember correctly. Fire, Water, Leaf, and Sand share similar reasons to Ice too. Fire trades out defensive options with better offenses and anti-melee instead of anti-range. Water keeps the movement but has better mid-range coverages and long-range coverages than Fire or Ice, but has somewhat poor melee. Leaf has better defenses but trades it for poorer melee and poorer movement. And Sand has everything decent. The only copy ability that doesn't follow either trends is Stone, who's the only one carried by an X Factor, and that's his Invincible Stone. Invincibility on command goes without saying to be powerful. Unfortunately, he has nothing else. Oh yeah, Spider is here too. This is because it does one thing that no other copy ability has: traps. A trap-based coverage is completely non-existent among all Kirby copy abilities. Spider having any at all and being really darn good at it is really effective. And then there's A tiers. Either they are B tier combat abilities with a solid X factor, or they have an insanely solid X factor. Like Poison is just better water. Water with the ability to poison characters is a solid X factor that Poison has. It goes without saying, and it's a perfect example of a B tier copy ability pushed by its X factor. As for characters with really strong X factors, Mirror comes to mind heavily, probably having one of the best defenses out there and one of the most unorthodox skill sets as well. With the duplication X factor, Mirror Kirby lends himself to a very strong X factor carry. They're not the best X factor, it definitely is one of the coolest. Flying is a better Jet, having insane movement actually confirmed to be comparable to a Warp Star, and having much more dynamic versions of Jet's moves as well. Wheel being another move carried by X factor comes to mind as well. It's insanely fast, also compared to Warp Star speeds, and armors through a lot of attacks. For an ability with virtually one move, it gets a lot done through movement and armor alone. And Spark is the best version of all the elemental copy abilities. Range, defense, mid-range, melee, it has almost everything in spades. Star Allies did a lot for this copy ability in all honesty. And only things it lacks is grappling and movement, and it's only good at everything, not great, but hey, Jack of all trades is better than the Master of one. Archer is the absolute best at range. There's absolutely no competition about it, and has really solid defense too. You can't get a better range than Archer. Tornado is carried by being the best at anti-melee. It's a literal tornado. You see this person come at you in the close quarters, what do? Nothing, that's what. Metal is a better rock. Yeah, I said it. Imagine having Rock's invincibility, but you can actually move. You're slow as all heck, but you know. Parasol's probably the best defensive copy ability of all the weapon copy abilities. Also having really good movement and speed. Master of one, once more. Beetle is Jet and Sword in one. You get Jet's movement and Sword's combat. However, it's only better than Jet and weaker than Sword. Sword does some pretty crazy stuff that Beetle just doesn't have. Ball, in most circumstances, is a C tier power. But put this guy in a closed room and tell me dead to my face that there are copy abilities that can handle Ball when he starts bombarding around like Pong on steroids. This guy is so chaotic that it should honestly count as an X factor of its own. But unless they have insane enough prowess that it can actually be a match, it's not gonna do it. It just isn't. Honestly, this setup would put Ball in S tier. It's the fact that this setup is situational that he gets bogged down to A tier instead. S ranks, either hard carried by an insane X factor or are just so good in so many aspects that they just have no competition. Mecha kind of just does UFO better. It has melee, mid-range, range, and trap coverages, doing all of them really well. Sword is the best jack of all trades. Brilliant melee? Yes. Great range? Yes. Great mid-range? Surprisingly, yes. All combat-based coverages it has in spades. Fighter and Wrestler are for the same reasons. Fighter even has great grapples, and Wrestler having the best grappling as a trade with bad range. Wrestler is honestly the best up close and personal fighter by a landslide. It's not even a competition. Staff falls in this too, being great at everything, but trades out range with absolutely perfect mid-range instead. And Hammer is only good at close quarters. But it's so strong at close quarters, it should be in this tier. Even the franchise acknowledges Hammer is one of the strongest copy abilities in the series, having its place in this tier list easily. Then there's Sleep, who has a healing factor X factor and can put other characters to sleep. The only copy ability with 2 X factors. And Ninja. Why was this copy ability allowed to exist? Close quarters, mid-range, long-range, movement, disappearance X factor ergo defensive, grapple, elemental power. This copy ability has literally everything. I honestly want to say it's the best of every copy ability, if it weren't for these two copy abilities, carried entirely by their X Factor, Ghost and ESP. Possession and Telekinesis are such powerful abilities to have that they basically carry themselves on the raw copy ability alone. They could essentially be instant wins in the right hand. And Smash, the fighting copy ability, designed for everything imaginable. The best of the best. This is probably the most subjective list out there, depending entirely on how strong you think a particular asset can be. So I'd like to know what you guys think yourself in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed this kind of dumb idea, do subscribe. I like noticing weird questions and answering them for no damn reason. Enjoy everyone. Till next time. See ya.